Hi, everybody. My name's Sam, and I'm the co-founder of zenGate Global. I'm joined today with Dan, the co-founder and CEO of zenGate Global.
Hey Sam, yeah, it's good to be able to talk a little bit more about what we have in store for this ATALA proposal that we were so graciously awarded by the community to really kind of lay things out in just a little bit more detail for the community. As I mentioned previously, our MO for Catalyst and for any funds received through Catalyst is always complete transparency and accountability. And this video is about, in large part, for us being accountable and us explaining what we're doing and us giving the community metrics by which to understand our progress and the progress they can make as well, utilizing what we are going to build through this initiative.
So a quick update on our side. We've spent the last week or so planning our trip to Sri Lanka, which we're looking to run some workshops in December of this year, linked up with our experts, Daryl from Continuum Loop, who's got extensive experience in the ecosystem building and governance space, and also with our expert Joyce Maynard, who has got over 30 years of experience working in the tea industry across a number of markets, from Kenya to Asian markets, and to buying markets out of Europe as well. So we've been quite busy planning the workshops, getting the materials ready. But today, I actually really want to focus on talking with Dan about his experience at IOG, working on different ecosystem building activities, whether that was out of Georgia, and other emerging economies. So I'm just going to start off with the first question, Dan. What does minimum viable ecosystem mean? And what did you mean by building an ecosystem building blueprint in our proposal?
Generally, what a minimum viable ecosystem is the minimum groundwork you need to lay down to successfully roll out a solution. In our case, it's Palmyra. In some cases, it will be ATALA, say, something that has to do with ATALA traceability or ATALA DIDs. If we're talking about Winter Protocol, which is what's powering Palmyra, it would actually be kind of the groundwork, the foundation that you really need to successfully roll out a tokenization and traceability protocol in a jurisdiction. It's not just about the tech. A lot of the secret sauce is in the business and logistics of the actual rollout. That's really important recipe for success. This is what we're also going to be concentrating on in this initiative, in this project, is really laying this out, as I say, taking the voodoo out of it, because a lot of people think it's kind of voodoo. If you haven't done it before, if you haven't really been immersed in that particular world of dealing with regulators, dealing with industry-wide deployments or region-wide deployments of technologies, a lot of people are intimidated by that, and there's really no reason for that. The intimidation comes from just these gaps in knowledge, and we believe that if people actually have an understanding of kind of an order of operations that you would have to take to be able to roll out a solution, I think it would demystify these things a lot more for them, and a lot more people would kind of get the opportunity and take the opportunity to roll out their own solutions on that scale.
Awesome. Thank you, Dan. And you mentioned a few different parts of the blueprint just earlier around the tech itself, the regulation, the compliance side, the logistics. So what to you are the key parts of the blueprint? You also mentioned order of operations, so we may touch on that afterwards. What are the key features that make deployment like this successful? What do you typically keep an eye out for, whether that's hiring the right people or making contact with the right people on the ground?
As I say, not just for this, but for many solution rollouts, your first question should always be a skeptical one. Does this need to exist? Is there a reason for this to exist? A lot of times, and especially in blockchain and Web3, we introduce solutions that we would like them to be Web3 solutions, but there's no real need for a Web3 solution. You don't always need to put information on a blockchain. You can sometimes use a database. It doesn't have to be an immutable database. It doesn't have to be a decentralized database. As huge of a proponent as I am, and we are at zenGate, of decentralization, of immutability, of all these wonderful things that the blockchain movement and the blockchain technology offers, we are also realistic in understanding that not everything needs to be cut with that same knife. Like I said, the first question you have to ask. This is also an exercise in removing emotion and replacing it with logic. Because if it's your project, a lot of times you're emotionally attached to it. I'm guilty of doing that as well. And you know that, Sam. I do get emotionally attached to some things that we do. This is actually a a logical company first decision, or are you favoring this because it's closer to your heart? Now, there's nothing wrong with that as long as, again, that's done with common sense. So it's not just an emotional response, but okay, yes, it's close to my heart because of A, B, C, D, and I believe and I see this being doing X, right? And then that makes sense, and you can still be passionate about things. You can still be emotional. Well, I don't want to use the word emotional in that way because it kind of has a negative connotation, but you can add passion and emotion to what you're doing as long as you keep that logical check. Yeah, it's very important to know how to gauge it. And in fact, Sam, that I myself, as well as you are, we're our biggest critics. And this is something that we've done for the length of the project, whether it is YT, do we really need to have this commodities exchange? Do we really need to have these value-add services? Do we really need a token? Do we really need to be in Sri Lanka? Do we need to be in other jurisdictions? So this is a very big part of building a minimum viable ecosystem, to have a very clear and logical distinction of if what you're doing really adds value. I mean, really, really, does it add value? Really? And if you get past that, if you can really kind of say, yes, it adds value because of A, B, C, D, and it cannot be done with more efficiently with other solutions, then yes, start basically looking at all these other things that you're talking about, regulators, staffing, logistics, politics, all these things that are a part of the solution.
Very nice. So just to summarize, there's sort of two key questions you have to ask. And that's something we've been doing as well, I think, as a company, and what you've been doing for a number of years during your tenure at IO, which is really asking yourself, is this project viable? Is it needed? Do people enjoy the solution? Do they get value from the solution? And then asking yourself as well, like, how commercial is this? Is this just a pilot for the sake of a pilot, or does this add some commercial value as well? And commercial doesn't necessarily need to always mean, financially positive, because there are different non-financial metrics that you can measure in this space, especially with blockchain, whether these are sustainability-based metrics or social-based metrics as well. So I think it's really important to define that. In our case with Palmyra, the commercial viability piece as a business is quite an important objective that we're trying to solve as well. So going in with that, knowing what that objective is, was quite important. You sort of mentioned, once you answer those questions, the rest sort of plays itself out. For those that haven't had the opportunity to see how it plays out, it might actually be useful to touch on what happens next. You're on the ground. What happens next? There's the regulators, there's the industry associations, there's the different pieces that fit around it. In our case, it was the payment solution, it's the logistics solution. How do you identify what those stakeholders look like? How do you identify what they do, and maybe what they could be doing as well to create a better system that you're trying to create on the ground? So maybe you could touch a bit on that, because it would provide a lot of context, I think, to those that are looking to do something like this.
Anytime I do something in a new jurisdiction, I always try to find a local partner, somebody who already knows the jurisdiction, who understands the fields that we're trying to enter, who can make the introductions, for example, or even if they don't have the context that you need, but if they're in the industry and they're savvy enough to be able to provide you information on how to navigate within that particular sect that you're entering, then yeah, they will have the connections. I've never seen it any other way. That's something that is really important, I think, is to find somebody who can kind of give you a macro understanding of what you're getting yourself into. Somebody who can do it in a logical, unemotional way. You will run into some things where you have somebody who you think is knowledgeable, but they have another agenda. They might feel threatened that you are entering that jurisdiction with your solution. They might feel like you owe them something. And so again, you need to be really wary of that and understand. And I'm not saying that everybody immediately going to be like, okay, well, what do I get out of it? Actually, a lot of times when I did work in these new jurisdictions, I mean, people came out, they were just a fan of Cardano, and they said, okay, we would like for you to operate here, and these are the opportunities. And so I think that you can find that with your own solution is a person or persons who are kind of on the same page as you, who get what you're trying to roll out, who have the connections, can give you a rundown and even give you, a tour. Another thing that I did a lot of times when we entered new jurisdiction is I would come down and I would just take a tour of the industry, of the country, talk to the people, just to kind of understand, be on the ground. I personally believe that if you are steering this solution and this is a solution that's rolling out in a jurisdiction you're not in, you should go to that jurisdiction. Go there, understand what's happening on the ground. Aside from that, now, where do you go beyond that? Beyond that, you just talk to your audience. And this happens through workshops. And this is what we did in Sri Lanka. I mean, this is how we found out what makes sense to the producers. We spoke to them, right, Sam? I mean, we had these workshops and we invited producers. Of course, our people in Sri Lanka, our Sri Lankan zenGate members, made those meetings possible, but we had those meetings before we really built out any kind of solution. We came there, we understood what's needed. Of course, the Web3 part was big value add, but it wouldn't have worked without these Web2 parts that we had a suspicion, but we didn't really understand the severity of it. Like, for example, payment. Think in the 21st century, a peaceful, advanced country, and in Sri Lanka is pretty advanced. That they're not like low tech or anything. People have phones, people have internet banking, they have modern conveniences like everybody else. So it's not some third world impoverished country that doesn't have any of these things. And still, even in a country like Sri Lanka, things like logistics, things like payments, things like remittances are more difficult than they are in developed economies like, say, UK, US, Japan, China. We didn't know this. And granted, if we would have done enough research, we would have probably figured it out. But even then, it doesn't really have a soul, right? What we did with zenGate, what we did with Palmyra, this is what we did at IOG. In Georgia, for example, we had workshops that identified pain points. Mm-hmm. And it is, again, very important to identify those pain points and also be ready to accept that the pain points that they have are not necessarily what your solution offers now. And you might have to pivot your solution to cover those pain points. Again, we weren't planning to get all about trying to figure out all these different payments into Sri Lanka, right? We wanted to go Web3. We wanted to put this commodity on there. We wanted to index it. We wanted to tokenize it. We wanted to put it out there, make all these cool things happen with it. And then we come there and they say, it's really, really expensive to ship this stuff. We want to ship. We want to work. We want to use all this technology. But what is all this technology going to do if we can't ship the product to the person that bought it on your platform properly? And I mean, of course they can ship it, but if we can't ship it for a reasonable price, or if we can't accept payments without this being a headache and taking some crazy amount of steps, it's just difficult to do business like that. It really cuts out a lot of clientele. A lot of people, unless they're really, really into what you want to buy, right? Just think about it as a regular consumer, right? You go into a store, you really want a Coke, right? You really, really want a Coke. All they have is Pepsi. Like, okay, I guess I'll have a Pepsi. You don't go to another store necessarily and look for Coke. Some would. Most people would just say, whatever, Pepsi. You go to IHOP, this place that I love so much. They don't have Coke. Is Pepsi okay? I guess. I don't leave the restaurant. And most people are like that. And so you have to really think about it. How much business are they losing just because most people don't want to deal with these crazy bank transfers, don't want to pay these exorbitant shipping fees? And what if they could actually get what they want, right? What if they actually had Coke in this place? You'd buy it over Pepsi, right? Yeah, you would. You want a Coke.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Like, just to break this segment up a bit to summarize. So I think just a quick commentary on Sri Lanka. So Sri Lanka is quite an interesting country where there's a lot of strong infrastructure from a domestic point of view. So their payments landscape is quite good. They've got a good acquiring system, good transfer system, good settlement system. But you run into a lot of different issues when you're trying to do cross-border transactions. And there are certain ways that people do it today, typically using SWIFT, but it's a bit clunky. It takes a few days. And it's not all that transparent. So especially for the customers that we're working with, the tea producers who are now pivoting more towards direct exports themselves, especially those that have specialty products that don't typically go through the traditional the auction system that they have. They don't really have an alternative way. So that was just something interesting we found out in the workshops that we didn't really know. We had a good understanding through our contacts in Sri Lanka that the domestics payment landscape was quite strong, but it wasn't until we actually tried it ourselves to get money in and out of the country that we ran into some of these problems. You mentioned something at the very start of the chat, which was finding the right partner on the ground. And I think you nailed it. It's one of those like critical decisions I think you have to make as a business entering a region that you're not familiar with. And it's not just the technical details that this person has, but it's a lot of the cultural nuances as well that they bring along to the table. At least from my experience, I think there is a playbook within the playbook around how do you identify these people and partners that you can sort of deploy things on the ground. There's a reason why when large institutions go into new markets, they JV, they create a joint venture with an established business. It's the same sort of thinking. But if you're a startup, if you're an emerging business and you're trying to do something from a grassroots point of view, trying to bootstrap this stuff, it's a little bit of a different playbook, and that's something we will definitely unpack, I think, in future episodes and through our open source documentation that we release. So that was something really interesting. The workshops were definitely really important for us. We've now run a number of different workshops. We've done a number in Sri Lanka. We've done a few out of Thailand, and we're going back again to do a few extra ones in Sri Lanka as well to continue our work. So I'm just going to pause there. There's obviously other components, Dan, that we haven't talked about in depth, like the regulatory landscape. I think that's something we definitely need to touch on at some point. But as we sort of close things up a bit, you obviously spent a number of years working at IO, a number of years working alongside people like Charles, who obviously been critical in terms of opening up markets for Cardano. What are some of the key lessons that you learned at your time at IO? How are you thinking about bringing that into this proposal so that people can learn from your wins, learn from your mistakes, so that they can accelerate the time in which they can enter and deploy something?
One of the biggest lessons in both what to do and what not to do is when you actually meet the regulators. You meet the big people. You meet the photo op people. You meet those people these photos you put on Twitter. And you say, met this guy, it was great to meet them, and we're talking about this great thing. Thank you very much for having us. You know, and you get 200 likes from people saying, right on, man. It's cool, right? It's good to meet these people. But at some point, you really have to kind of think about, so what is it that I am looking for? Of course, initial introductions are good. That's fine. You can make introductions. You can take those photos. You can have those conversations. But after a while, you have to kind of think about, I'm meeting with, say, this minister, right? Or I'm meeting with this director. What is it that we're going to be doing? What is the minister going to be working with us on? Are they going to be helping us with regulatory landscape that we can't sail by ourselves? Are they going to help us with some sort of legislation that would kind of clear a path for adoption? Do they have connections to other industries that they can put us in touch with? We might not necessarily need direct help from, say, the Minister of Interior, right? But the Ministry of Interior understands what we're doing. They support us and say they introduce us to, say, the director of the Port Authority. Now, that's a strategic partnership, right? And so we might be having some sort of an export bottleneck, say, in this Port Authority. So you can go on about this all day long. You know, you really have to identify what your blockers are, and what your wants and what your must-haves are. And when you have these meetings and you really make these rounds with these people, you don't get swept up in the glamour of it. Cool to meet the prime minister of a country. It's really cool. I've been there. But if you're meeting a prime minister and you're meeting them like for the second time, you better come to him with some straight business, because a person like that is also not going to waste their time meeting you if you're just kind of there to shoot the shit. I mean, they might, but they're not going to meet you in an official capacity. So you have to really get to business at some point. You really have to be clear about that pretty much from the start. What is my business there? You know, am I just meeting this person one time, you know, to say hi? Can I give my respect to their stance and to really say, you know, say that we're here, and so they don't have any issues with what you're doing? Or are we developing a relationship that would yield specific KPIs. You set your KPIs as early as possible, and you kind of really think about it. What is that KPI? What is that ROI on the time that you're going to spend there? And how is that moving your project forward? Because you could always kind of say, well, if I meet this person, it's going to be nice because if they like us, is going to have us, we're going to be in their good Rolodex, in the green Rolodex, not the red Rolodex. But then again, what does that mean?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, does that really mean anything? It's like, okay, they like you. And what? So that's really, really something I've learned working at IOG, working at these jurisdictions. You just have to really understand, why are you spending your time on what you're spending your time on with these kinds of people, and make sure that you move things along, and you make sure that you don't get stuck with, endless meetings and dinners and cigars that really just, I mean, it's fun, but do they really lead anywhere? Are they leading somewhere? Are we doing business, or are we just hanging out? So that's really important, I think.
And I think part of that sort of lesson is doing the legwork before you go there in person. And that's something that the on-ground partner can help you out with. I think it's really important to find someone that can help you understand whether it's a regulatory landscape or an industry specific landscape around who the movers and shakers are. How does the ecosystem look like from a stakeholder's point of view? And there's a lot of research and legwork that needs to be done going into these meetings, I think. And you really get an opportunity to test these hypotheses, to understand, like, what is it that they want? At least for Palmyra, like, there needs to be a commercial value add that we provide. Otherwise, it doesn't make sense. Like, these ministers are very important people. Their time is extremely valuable. So it's really important going into these meetings or going into the region, really understanding, like, this is what we do, this is how we add value, and this is where we need your support, and this is how you benefit from it. And so the broader ecosystem benefits from it as well. And that's definitely something that you can systemize and you can create artifacts around, so that you can keep doing it over and over again in the same region, different stakeholders or different markets as well. So that's something, Dan, yeah, you and I have talked about a fair bit before, and there's a playbook around that. So it seems like the more we talk, there's a broad sort of macro playbook, and within the playbook itself, you've got chapters, and each chapter has its own mini playbook. So yeah, it's been fun sort of going through some of this stuff with you. So to wrap things up, Dan, we're going to Sri Lanka in December. After the trip, it'll be followed by working group sessions with a panel of experts. What are your closing thoughts around this, like in terms of, yeah, how we're approaching it, what you're looking forward to, what should the community expect from these trips, from each of these milestones that we're looking to hit?
Yeah, I think at this point, us going into Sri Lanka would really be to start to lay down groundwork for a more focused industry tooling that would help enhance what they have on the ground already, to create a streamlined set of tooling for them to be able to do business in a more efficient and a more advanced way, hence eliminating the bottlenecks that they have right now, and it would be getting them access to buyers through laying down this logistical and administrative and quantitative groundwork that we're going to be doing, this tooling that we're going to be putting into place.
Thank you, Dan. From our side, at least, thanks again for the support to the community. We'll be doing some of these relatively frequently, not just for the ATALA proposal, but for some of the other proposals that we have. So the winter traceability and tokenization proposal that we got funded for, as well as the Rosenbridge proposal for SBO tooling as well. So once again, thanks to everyone. Dan, thanks for your time, sharing your experience and sort of the playbook as well that we're working on. So thanks again, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Sam. Have a good one, everyone.